Kilcoursey, the Unsolved Murder of Father Niall Molloy. On the evening of Sunday, the 7th of July, 1985, three good friends, Richard Flynn, his wife Teresa, and Father Niall Molloy shared drinks together in the master bedroom of the Flynn's home, Kilcoursey House, just outside Clara, County Offaly. Before sunrise the following morning, Father Niall Molloy would lie dead. The culprit made a full admission. However, the Molloy family's 40-year search for truth and justice had only just begun. In this episode, despite widespread public outcry, the government refuses to launch an independent inquiry into Father Niall's case. Determined to uncover the truth about his death, the Molloy family takes matters into their own hands by assembling their own legal team for the upcoming inquest. Episode 4: The Inquest. Justice Rowe's controversial decision went on to create heated exchanges in the Dáil, causing a severe headache for the government. On the 19th of June 1986, Fine Gael TD Liam Skelly made concerning allegations against the church in the Dáil. Deputy Skelly wanted a full Dáil debate into Richard Flynn's acquittal. He claimed there was an anxiety to hush up the facts and a lot of questions remained unanswered. Deputy Skelly was aggrieved that not only was Father Niall's name being tarnished by all the innuendo, but also that Father Niall's nephew had been denied entry into the priesthood. He declared the Church and the Cardinal must answer for their interference in this case. The deputy was referring to Cardinal Thomas O'Fiach, the head of the Catholic Church in Ireland. The Ceann Comhairle told Deputy Skelly to stop on a number of occasions, but Deputy Skelly protested that this is what they were in the Dáil for. His request for a full Dáil debate was refused. The Catholic Press and Information Office would later state categorically that the allegation was totally without foundation, and they asked that Deputy Skelly either substantiate the allegation or withdraw it. On the 24th of June, when a bill was being discussed in the Dáil, Deputy Skelly took the floor and with it an opportunity to try to raise Father Niall's case again. The deputy Ceann Comhairle tried to interrupt, but Deputy Skelly spoke over him. He stated, "I cannot raise a legitimate matter like the death of Father Molloy in this house because the establishment and everybody else are playing cards together. And they want it covered up and smothered. They are succeeding in doing so. I will try to raise it again. It's a disgrace. As a member of Parliament, I am ashamed of this action. The circumstances under which this man died have been covered up." Deputy Skelly was told to return to discussion of the bill in hand, not Father Niall's case. He told the deputy Ceann Comhairle he had been refused permission to raise the matter at adjournment, and he further stated, "A man lies dead with a pall hanging over his name, and the church and establishment and the DPP and this house have all covered it up." On the 1st of July 1986, 4 TDs took the opportunity to put questions to the then Minister for Justice, Alan Dukes. The 4 TDs were Deputies Liam Naughton, Fine Gael from Roscommon, Bernard Allen, Fine Gael from Cork North Central, Liam Skelly, Fine Gael from Dublin West, and Michael Keating, the Deputy Leader of the newly formed Progressive Democrats. They all asked the Minister for Justice if he proposed to set up a public inquiry into the circumstances surrounding the death of Father Niall. The Minister for Justice provided a well-rehearsed answer to the deputy's question. He would offer, "The method prescribed by law for inquiring into the circumstances of a death such as this is a coroner's inquest, which of course is a sworn inquiry. The holding of an inquest is mandatory in any case where the coroner is of the opinion that a death may have occurred in a violent or unnatural manner, or suddenly and from unknown causes. And I have been authoritatively informed that arrangements are in train to have an inquest held in this case. The date of the inquest is already fixed, at least tentatively, for the 24th of July. Deputy Bernard Allen tried to raise questions about what he considered inconsistent decisions by the judiciary, but the Ceann Comhairle wouldn't entertain this. The Ceann Comhairle would only allow the Minister for Justice to be asked questions about whether he was willing to hold a public inquiry into the case. Deputy Allen was reprimanded by the Ceann Comhairle when he tried to ask why there seems to be one law for the rich and one law for the poor. When Deputy Allen asked the minister if, due to a considerable level of public disquiet, he proposed to hold a public sworn inquiry, the Minister for Justice repeated a snippet of the answer he had given already. He would offer once again, "As I pointed out in my reply, the law provides that in cases like this, there should be a public sworn inquiry, that is, an inquest. I have told the House that the date of the inquest is already fixed for the 24th of July. Deputy Skelly then addressed the Minister for Justice. Will the Minister set up a tribunal of inquiry due to the many unanswered questions of fact, of a forensic, medical and financial nature, and the widespread public disquiet engendered thereby, and given that the deceased and perpetrator's possessions were handed over without being sent for forensic testing?" Minister Jukes regurgitated the same reply, stating, "I can only repeat what I said at the outset, that the law provides in cases of this kind for a sworn inquiry, which is the inquest. The Deputy and the House will be aware that any issues that appear to be relevant to the case in question can be pursued at a coroner's inquest." Deputy Skelly persisted, though. He asked, "Under the circumstances, I do not think that would satisfy the disquiet that is around the country about the case. I am asking for a tribunal of inquiry, not a public inquiry to be set up to look into the facts surrounding the case. What will be examined at the inquest will be different, but I am sure all the information required will not come out unless there is a tribunal of inquiry. Will the Minister address himself specifically to my question?" Once again, the Minister for Justice fobbed him off. "I have addressed myself specifically to the question and said that the law provides in cases like this for a public sworn inquiry, otherwise known as a coroner's inquest. I do not think it would be right for me or the House to anticipate in any way either the conduct of the inquest or verdict or conclusion that might be reached by that inquest." Deputy Terry Leyden then asked the Minister for Justice if he found it unusual that the trial was held before the inquest. The Minister for Justice explained that an inquest cannot be held when criminal proceedings are pending. There were some heated exchanges between the Ceann Comhairle and Deputy Leyden when he tried to ask why the inquest wasn't held just after Father Niall was killed, but before Richard was charged. He also wanted to know whether it would be worthwhile for the DPP to refer the verdict to the Supreme Court but before he could finish his question, the Ceann Comhairle cut him off, exclaiming, "That is out of order." Then a new flurry of chastisements from the Ceann Comhairle followed because the office of the DPP does not answer to the Minister for Justice. The Ceann Comhairle commented that it would be a very sad day for Ireland if the decision of a court was reopened and discussed across the floor of the Dáil. When things settled down, Deputy Allen put another question to the Minister. In view of the strong feelings expressed by relatives of Father Molloy who have met many deputies, will the Minister consider meeting them in order to discuss many of the questions raised by them about the performance of the Garda and some of the legal profession? Alan Jukes replied, I can assure the Deputy that with the best will in the world, and I am asking the Deputy to accept that, I would think it highly improper and imprudent of me to meet any group of persons to discuss the questions the Deputy has raised, particularly in view of the fact that an inquest is pending. Deputy Skelly was well aware that an inquest has only limited powers. He asked, Is the Minister aware that already there has been a court case about this death and that there was widespread dissatisfaction after that case? Is he asking us now to believe that satisfaction will result from the inquest that is to be held without having a tribunal of inquiry to satisfy the public? Minister Jukes responded, I can only repeat what I said to the Deputy earlier in response to a question, namely that it would be wrong of this House to prejudice in any way either the conduct or the conclusions of the inquest. Minister Jukes refused to entertain proposals for either an independent public inquiry or a tribunal of inquiry. He felt that because an inquest is classed as a sworn public inquiry, the Molloy family and the public should be satisfied with that. On the 3rd of July 1986, Father Niall's nephew, Ian Maher, appeared on RTE's Current Affairs programme Today Tonight. The main topic covered on the programme that night was the controversial outcome of the trial of Richard Flynn. There had been a huge surge in public and media interest in the case in the 3 weeks since the trial. The Molloy family were devastated by what took place in court and by the lack of answers and explanations for Father Niall's death. During the interview, the producers of Today Tonight posed 2 main questions. These questions were at the time foremost in the minds of the Molloy family. Firstly, they asked, if death happened after midnight, why was Father Niall's watch stopped at 10:40? Up until now, the public were not aware of Father Niall's broken watch. Ian claimed to have Garda sources that confirmed to him that the watch was noted as being broken while still on Father Niall's wrist at the murder scene. He described the hands of the watch as being jammed by the broken glass at 10:40. For Ian and the Molloys, 10:40 was not necessarily the time of death, but it could indicate the time of the assault. When he was asked why the watch didn't appear at the trial, Ian wondered aloud, why would the Gardaí give back a most valuable piece of forensic evidence to his Uncle William, just 3 days after the murder? Ian couldn't stress enough the importance the watch could have had on the case and mused that perhaps this is why it was handed back to the family. The second question Today Tonight posed was, if the row took place in the bedroom, why was a glass table smashed downstairs? This question referred to the broken coffee table in the TV room downstairs, which again was not mentioned at the trial. The explanation provided to the Gardaí after Father Niall was killed was that some children visiting for the wedding broke the table. Their statements were omitted from the Garda file and were never investigated or corroborated. Ian explained that he also had a source that was in Kilcoursey that night, and they indicated to him that a struggle took place downstairs in the house. he was amazed that this possibility never came up at the trial, but he firmly believed that the violence took place downstairs. Ian felt two particular bloodstains were of significance: the unidentified blood on the newel post at the top of the stairs and the blood splatters on the outside of the master bedroom door. These bloodstains suggested to him that they were caused when Father Niall was being moved upstairs after being beaten. Ian pondered why Father Niall came to be in the Flynn's bedroom if he was assaulted downstairs. He then answered his own question by stating that this was the point. It was very significant that all the innuendo arose because Father Niall was moved upstairs to the bedroom. As far as the Molloy family was concerned, the missing deposit of £12,000 was the cause of the row, not drink. Ian stated, up to the Friday before his death, the money had not been repaid. Niall was recorded as saying that. I think this agitated him. I know it agitated him because the man appeared depressed for some days before he was killed. The element of trust in the Flynns was long over, 28 years, and was badly shaken over this particular deal. I know he had been advised to extricate his finances from the whole setup. Certainly I know it caused him considerable concern, but I am sure it was more because of what he considered a betrayal of friendship than the fiscal aspects of it. For Father Niall's family, one of the most glaring details barely alluded to during the trial was the bloody 8-foot-long drag mark on the white carpet found in the Flynn's bedroom. It started 6 feet away from the foot of the bed and ended 2 feet from Father Niall's head. The Gardaí and forensic teams, who were experts in blood evidence, were not asked at the trial to draw any conclusions as to how the drag mark came about. The Gardaí had, however, come up with a possible scenario. They theorized that a large concentration of blood nearest the foot of the bed was where Father Niall first fell face down on the carpet and bled. Someone then dragged his body for just over 8 feet, but for some reason gave up. Dr. Smith of the Forensic Science Lab reported identifying Richard's blood on the back of Father Niall's trousers, just above the back pocket. After being dragged, Father Niall was left lying face down, causing the other concentration of blood a few feet from where he would end up. The blood splatters found on the wall beside Father Niall's body with an upward trajectory made Gardaí believe that possibly Father Niall was moved one last time by being turned over onto his back. The Gardaí further speculated the motion of flipping Father Niall's body over could have caused the blood to fly in an upward direction. They felt an alternative cause for these blood splatters in an upward direction could also have been due to Father Niall being kicked while on the floor. During the trial, no effort was made to explain who moved Father Niall's body or why. Another detail of the case that caused concern for the Molloy family was the vague estimation of the time of death. Dr. Harbison assessed the time of death as happening between late on the night of the 7th of July or the very early hours of the 8th of July, 1985. According to Richard, he went to bed around midnight and the assault took place shortly after that. According to Dr. O'Sullivan, at approximately 2 a.m., Father Niall was still warm and rigor mortis had not yet set in. Rigor mortis usually begins to manifest in the face 2 hours after death. It then progresses to the rest of the body over the next 6 to 8 hours. Dr. O'Sullivan therefore felt Father Niall was not long dead when he arrived just after 2 a.m. The Molloy family felt they also had a good reason to be concerned about the estimated time of death due to the condition of Father Niall's watch when it was handed back. Ian felt that there was complete uncertainty as to what went on in Kilcoursey House that night, and that the full story had not yet been told. When asked for his reaction to the trial, Ian stated, "I don't think anything resembling the whole truth has come out, and the scenario as I witnessed in the court case didn't touch on the incidents that happened that night as I understand them. I'm shocked and I'm abhorred, not only as a nephew, but as an Irishman, that our system of justice can work in such a manner. I mean, it's frightening. It's scary." The 8th of July, 1986, the first anniversary of Father Niall's death. The first anniversary Mass was held in the church in Castlecoot, attended by Father Niall's family, friends and parishioners. It was followed by a protest march on Dublin. Also on the 8th of July 1986, the Irish independent journalist Tom Reddy published a small article in relation to Father Niall's watch. In Watch Clue to Priest's Death, Mr. Reddy reported that William Molloy had brought Father Niall's broken watch to a jeweller in Castlereagh to repair. This jeweller then sent the watch to an expert jeweller in Dublin for repairs. Mr. Reddy claimed in his article that the unnamed expert explained to him that Father Niall's watch was shockproof and would not break or show a mark even after a 15-foot fall. He also claimed that the extent of the damage to Father Niall's watch would suggest it took a severe blow. In the wake of the trial, Justice Frank Roe and to some extent the judiciary would be slated in the media. On the 9th of July 1986, the day after Father Niall's first anniversary and just a week after Today Tonight aired on national television, an article appeared in the Irish Press newspaper. In light of all the criticism of the judge and the judiciary after the trial, the article was designed to impart a favourable view of Justice Roe. It read, "The name of Frank Roe, the presiding judge in the controversial Father Molloy-Richard Flynn case, is one which immediately evokes expressions of affection in legal circles. Judge T.F. Roe, as he prefers to be known, is one of the most colourful members of the Irish judiciary, though, as many will testify, the most private of men." The author then went on to exalt Justice Roe's long legal career and professional virtues. He then spoke of Justice Roe's amateur riding career, the fact that he owned winning racehorses, as well as him having powerful acquaintances. The article read, "Apart from the law, his lifelong passion has been for horses, an interest he shares with friend and former Taoiseach Liam Cosgrave." Justice Roe's sensitivity to the plight of defendants in his court was also alluded to. Quote, "He is not perceived to be a harsh sentencer and tries to inquire into the domestic difficulties of an accused." End quote. The freelance journalist who penned the article for the Irish Press was Mr. Conor Lenihan. Conor is the son of Brian Lenihan Sr., Fianna Fáil politician and very close friend of Richard and Teresa Flynn. Mr. Lenihan also revealed that during his extensive research for the article, he discovered that Justice Roe was perceived to be somewhat more lenient in his approach to people who found themselves in difficulty from the horse racing industry. Years later, Mr. Lenihan would give an interview to Gemma O'Doherty of the Irish Independent, defending the article he wrote on Justice Roe in 1986. He explained that he regarded himself as a professional journalist, and when asked to write the article by the Irish Press, he put any political or family involvements to one side. He stated, "I felt it was certainly within my professional impartiality to do so. I did extensive research for the article, and the overwhelming views of those interviewed were hugely positive about the judge in question. I am not my father's keeper. I was not a friend of the Flynn family. I wasn't at the wedding. I was acting as a proper, impartial journalist. After the Today Tonight programme aired, the public were outraged. There was huge criticism of the Gardaí over their questionable handling of the watch. An assistant Garda commissioner requested the 5 Gardaí who had handled the watch while in their custody write additional statements relating to the watch. None of them referred to the watch in their original statements made in 1985. The additional statements from the 3 Dublin-based Gardaí all claimed that the watch was working away fine during the post-mortem. The other 2 Gardaí from Clara also wrote additional statements in relation to their handling of the watch at the post-mortem and also handing it back to the Molloys. They both stated that they observed the watch was broken, but they did not confirm in their statements if the watch was stopped. These 5 additional statements were to be included in the coroner's file. The Gardaí had to get their stories up to date before the inquest. A coroner's inquest may have a jury present, but they only have the power to deliberate on the cause of death. The coroner has no prosecution powers, and besides having been acquitted, Richard Flynn was now immune from any further criminal prosecution in this case. The inquest was scheduled for the 24th of July, 1986, in Tullamore, County Offaly. The Molloy family had no say or input into how the criminal trial had been prosecuted, as that had all been decided by the state, but they felt the state had let Father Niall down. The Molloys would be better prepared for the inquest. Father Niall's nephews, Ian and Bill Maher, approached a little-known solicitor who had a practice in Dublin called Ben O'Rafferty. Bill and Ian had sought out Ben because they had read about a private prosecution case he brought on behalf of a man in Limerick. Ben was well aware of Father Niall's case, as was the whole country, and he agreed to represent the Molloys. He would enlist the help of a young barrister called Peter Charlton, who had a flair for forensic pathology. Ben, Peter, and the Molloys developed a legal strategy. Ben and Peter would represent the Molloy family at the inquest to try to obtain the correct verdict as to the cause of Father Niall's death. Then they would pursue civil cases against the Flynns for damages resulting from Father Niall's death. Once this was accomplished, their ultimate goal would be to bring a private murder charge against Richard. Private prosecutions were extremely rare in Ireland. The Molloys were warned that this would be costly. Each civil case could cost up to £10,000 in fees. However, the potential costs would not deter the Molloys. Unlike the Minister for Justice, Ben and Peter were realistic about what they could achieve at the inquest. Their goal was to obtain a verdict in line with the medical evidence, that death was due to acute brain swelling and subdural hemorrhage as a result of head injuries. Ben and Ian, in preparation for the inquest, tried to speak to witnesses the Gardaí neglected to interview. They approached Dr. Greeley in Tullamore Hospital, who admitted Teresa Flynn on the 8th of July 1985. Dr. Greeley told Ben and Ian that Teresa was admitted between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. This completely contradicted Dr. O'Sullivan's statement that he drove Teresa to hospital, where she was admitted just after 3 a.m. Ben and Peter would request that Dr. Greeley be summoned to give evidence at the inquest. After the trial, the Garda file was returned to the office of the DPP. Normally, the family of the deceased do not have any legal right to the Garda file. Because Richard Flynn was to be privately defended by the same barrister as in his trial, his counsel had access to the file months before the inquest. Ben and Peter couldn't stress enough the importance of getting their hands on a copy of the Garda file as well. It would be crucial, otherwise they would be working blind. The Molloy family took up the challenge. It seemed they were not going to take no for an answer and began a lobbying campaign. Everyone who was anyone in political circles or who held positions of power or influence were lobbied and petitioned for the release of the Garda file to the Molloy's legal team. They received donations from American supporters who also offered to apply pressure to Irish politicians in relation to the case. As well as the lobbying campaign, the Molloys opened a confidential post office box in Castlereagh Post Office and appealed to anyone with information to get in touch. Father Niall's family were also planning to bring a civil case against Richard Flynn. In the Bank of Ireland, Castlereagh, a bank account was opened called Father Molloy Fighting Fund, where donations could be made to help with the legal costs. Whenever a judge grants a defence application for a directed acquittal, the counsel who prosecuted the case has to complete a report explaining why they feel the judge had to grant the application and whether they felt the decision made by the judge was correct. On the 12th of July 1986, Mr. Raymond Groark sat down and wrote a report for the Director of Public Prosecutions. Normally a report of this nature is covered by legal privilege and remains private. A summary of the communication between Mr. Groark and the DPP was published as part of a report into Father Niall's case in 2015. We will examine the 2015 report in more detail in a later episode. Mr. Groark began by going through the evidence that was presented at the trial, and he then detailed the submissions made by the defence and the judge's ruling. He disagreed with Judge Rowe's decision to acquit on both counts. As in the trial, he felt that the jury should have been given the opportunity to assess the possibility of a heart attack contributing to Father Niall's death. Mr. Groark also felt that a heart attack contributing to death was insufficient to amount to a defence to manslaughter. However, what appeared to upset Mr. Groark more than the acquittal of manslaughter was Richard's acquittal on the assault charge. He felt very strongly that the jury should definitely have been allowed to deliberate on whether the accused acted in self-defence and if the level of force used was indeed reasonable. Mr. Groark was of the opinion that even if Father Niall had attacked Richard first, the force used by Richard was excessive, regardless if he used it in his own self-defence. What is surprising, though, is how Mr. Groark considered he would have felt had he been the defence counsel and lost the application. He stated, "If I had been defending the case, I would have been most surprised and disappointed not to have obtained a direction to acquit having regard to the evidence on cross-examination." Mr. Groark concluded his report expressing a very firm belief that the count of assault should not have been withdrawn from the jury. There was ample evidence for the jury to consider whether or not the defence of self-defence was valid. This is the case even if there was no other evidence at all other than that of the accused's statement. On the 18th of July 1986, Detective Sergeant John Dunn and Sergeant Ford from Clara met with William Molloy. Detective Sergeant Dunn took notes of the meeting and what was discussed to compile a report for his superiors. The Gardaí wanted to discuss Father Niall's watch in advance of the inquest, but William also had a few issues he wished to raise. The conversation started with William expressing his concern over the remaining horses still at Kilcoursey, which were jointly owned by his late brother. He explained that he had discovered the man in Sligo had received £2,000 commission for the sale of Stepaside. The Gardaí took note of this, but it would be up to the family to pursue this through the civil courts. They discussed the watch, and William confirmed that he had given it to a jeweller in Castlerea to repair. Detective Sergeant Dunn later spoke with the jeweller in Castlerea. The jeweller would confirm the glass on the face of the watch had cracked, and the second hand was being pressed down by the glass, stopping the watch. Detective Sergeant Dunn, in his subsequent report, stated that the jeweller replaced the glass on the front and replaced the battery, and then the watch worked perfectly again. He asserted the jeweller in Castlerea repaired the watch himself, which contradicts Tom Reddy's article where Tom claimed it was sent for repairs to an expert in Dublin. William had one more matter of business he wanted to discuss. He wanted to make the Gardaí aware of some potential new information about the case. The Molloys had been receiving many letters of support, and most of them were anonymous. However, one in particular stood out to him. It was posted in Limerick on the 7th of July 1986, and its author claimed to be a waiter who served at the Sunday lunch in Kilcoursey exactly 1 year before. William explained that he had been passing on any letters with information to his solicitor, who had advised him not to discuss them with the Gardaí. As he felt it could help the case, William gave the Gardaí a copy anyway. The letter would read, "Dear Mr. Molloy, I feel I must write to you. I happened to be at the wedding in County Offaly as a waiter on the day your brother died. There was a row early in the evening where Father Niall and Mr. Flynn were fighting downstairs. Mrs. Flynn got in between them to stop them. As Father Niall was bleeding, she took him upstairs to clean him up, and Mr. Flynn followed. While Mrs. Flynn was trying to clean him up, the row started again. Mrs. Flynn kicked and boxed Father Niall in the room at about 9 p.m. Everyone seemed to go away. Mr. Flynn was drunk. There was some heated row with both Mr. and Mrs. Flynn at the time. The casual staff were paid and told to go. Some bottles were broken in the first fight. Mrs. Flynn's daughter cleaned up the mess. Father Niall was alive at 9:30, but he was bleeding a lot. Don't forget that the judge in charge is a friend of Mrs. Flynn, and he has horses in training with Liam, redacted, at the Curragh. Wish I could help further, but that is all I know. Father was a nice man. I only met him at the wedding. He was murdered in cold blood. I can't give my name, as I depend on big functions for a living. A friend." The outcome of the trial had been so contentious and was causing such controversy that the Attorney General's office contacted the office of the DPP. This only happens on very rare occasions. Talks took place behind closed doors, but the consensus was that the inquest should be seen to be handled more fairly than the trial. The Friday before the inquest was due to start, the Minister for Justice, Alan Dukes, ordered that the file should be released to the Molloy's legal team. The file would first be sent to the coroner for his perusal, and once the coroner had reviewed the file's contents, it would be made available to Ben and Peter. On the 23rd of July, 1986, 36 hours before the inquest was due to begin, the Attorney General's office contacted Ben and Peter, providing them with access to the file. However, there were conditions attached. They could not release any of the file to the media or hand any of it over to members of Father Niall's family. Ben and Peter would not be given access to the whole Garda file. The covering file the Gardaí gave to the DPP when submitting the book of evidence was withheld. This covering file would consist of the findings of the Gardaí's investigations, including details into the financial dealings between Father Niall and the Flynns. The night before the inquest, the coroner for Westmeath and Offaly, Mr. Patrick Greeley, contracted laryngitis and had to hand over the proceedings to his deputy coroner, Mr. Brian Mahon, a qualified solicitor. The inquest began on Thursday, the 24th of July, 1986, in the Circuit Court in Tullamore, County Offaly. Not all inquests require a jury, but because Father Niall's death was a violent one, a jury of 9 men and 3 women from the local area were sworn in. The night before the inquest, the state announced that they were taking the unprecedented step of sending legal representation to the inquest. Barrister-at-law Mr. Hugh Hartnett and Mr. Seamus McKenna, senior counsel, were appointed to represent the state, the Attorney General and the Gardaí. Liam Lycett would arrange for Mr. James Connolly, barrister-at-law, to represent the Flynns. Mr. Connolly was junior counsel under Paddy McEntee at Richard's trial and was very familiar with the Garda file on the case. Dr. Declan Gilsenan, a pathologist who worked in both Tullamore and Portlaoise hospitals, was enlisted by Mr. Connolly on behalf of the Flynns. When necessary, if Dr. Harbison was unavailable, Dr. Gilsenan would provide cover for the state pathologist. Dr. Gilsenan was asked to compile a report to help refute the medical evidence and to attend to give expert witness testimony. The Molloys were being represented by Mr. Peter Charlton, barrister-at-law, but he had been given less than 36 hours to review the Garda file before the inquest. The Garda file, which includes all the original statements, the post-mortem report, photographs and maps, becomes the backbone of the coroner's inquest file. The coroner in turn decides which witnesses should take the stand to give evidence and in what order. This time, Richard and Teresa Flynn would both have to take the stand. The inquest was expected to last at least 1 day, but if there were cross-examinations, it could last any number of days. Because of the anticipated media focus on Tullamore, the courthouse was spruced up and its front doors were repainted. Most of the town turned out to watch the media circus and the arrival of the main players as they shuffled past the cameras. The gallery was open to the public and it was packed. Liam Skelly, TD from Dublin, took a seat in the public gallery along with Father Niall's family, parishioners and supporters. The coroner, Mr. Mahon, began by pointing out that the aim of the inquest was to find out how, when and where Father Niall died. He stated that no civil or criminal liability would be suggested in any way to the jury. He declared, "There may well be another forum for that." Mr. Mahon was making it clear that once the inquest concluded, no criminal investigation would take place, no negligence would be attributed, and no one would be found guilty or innocent. Members of the Garda Technical Bureau would be the first witnesses to be called. Garda Byrne, the photographer, and Garda Campbell, the mapping expert, read aloud their statements detailing the duties they performed at the scene. The next 2 witnesses to take the stand at the inquest were Detective Gardaí, Declan Buckley and Oliver Clunan. They also provided testimony as to their attending Kilcoursey House on Monday the 8th of July 1985 and the duties they carried out at the scene. They confirmed being in attendance for the post-mortem in Tullamore Hospital. Both Gardaí were also given their recent additional statements to read out. They would both testify to the watch being in perfect working order despite the suggestion it was stopped at 10:40 when it was handed back to the Molloys. In their separate statements, they both recalled hearing Dr. Harbison say, "That watch is going," when he removed the watch from Father Niall's wrist. They then claimed to overhear Detective Keating remark to Dr. Harbison that the watch reminded him of the Air India disaster. The 2 Gardaí would be cross-examined by Mr. Charlton, counsel for the Molloy family. One of the Gardaí, Detective Oliver Clunan, when asked, admitted that he had not referred to the watch or its condition in his original statement made the year before. He further conceded that his additional statement had been prepared at the request of a senior officer in the Gardaí following RTE's Today Tonight programme the month before. The other Garda, Detective Declan Buckley, under cross-examination, would admit that he in fact never actually saw the watch, as he was standing about 4 feet behind Dr. Harbison during the post-mortem. Detective Garda Michael Keating, the third Garda from Dublin, who prepared an additional statement about the watch and who allegedly spoke to Dr. Harbison about the Air India bombing, would be called to give his evidence on day 2 of the inquest. Next, Detective Sergeant Hancock testified to being tasked with examining Father Niall's room and the rooms on the ground floor of Kilcoursey House. He would detail the damage to both the dining table and coffee table, as well as confirming that he found no trace of any blood downstairs during his examination. The witness was then excused. The next witness listed to give evidence was the state pathologist, Dr. John Harbison. He began by outlining his observations at the scene, adding that in his opinion, Father Niall had not been lying on his back for long before he died. The concentration of blood at each end of the drag mark suggested to him that Father Niall had been lying face down and bled onto the carpet in 2 locations before being turned over onto his back. He then went on to detail the external and internal injuries Father Niall sustained, as he had done at the trial. Dr. Harbison explained his findings were based on the examination he conducted on Father Niall's body, and later examination of Father Niall's brain in consultation with neurosurgeon Dr. Michael Farrell of the Richmond Hospital. Dr. Harbison concluded with the same opinion. Father Molloy died from acute brain swelling and acute subdural hemorrhage, both resulting from multiple injuries to the head and neck, principally to the face. The pulmonary oedema, or fluid in the lungs, was most likely caused by the head injuries. He was then cross-examined. Mr. McKenna, counsel for the state, rose to cross-examine the state pathologist. He asked about the severity of the head injuries, as there were no bones or teeth fractured. Dr. Harbison agreed with Mr. McKenna in that Father Niall's head injuries were not severe enough to break bones. Mr. McKenna then got Dr. Harbison to accede to the possibility that the jaw injury was caused by Father Niall falling against a blunt object, like a bedpost. Mr. Charlton would now need to take the opportunity under cross-examination to dispel the pinball theory developed by Mr. McEntee at Richard's trial. He asked if it was likely Father Niall hit his head off fixed objects, such as the footboard. Dr. Harbison stated, although possible, that it was unlikely Father Niall fell against something because there was, as he put it, an absence of the shedding of blood in the associated pattern. Mr. Charlton then followed up in relation to the injury to Father Niall's left lower jaw and its more possible cause. Dr. Harbison felt the injury on the right side of the lower left jaw lends itself to possible causation by foot. The blow was probably inflicted with a fist, but a shod foot was more likely. He would add that Father Niall did not look like he was kicked to death, but that the injury to the jaw had most likely been caused by a kick. Mr. Charlton asked whether surgical intervention, if sought, could have saved Father Niall's life. Dr. Harbison agreed that surgical intervention could have increased the chances of survival, but in Father Niall's case, it was purely speculative. When asked if he felt there had been any attempt to clean Father Niall's face, Dr. Harbison replied that there was a suggestion of that. It was very likely. Mr. Charlton then asked Dr. Harbison to address one of the injuries to Father Niall's leg near his groin. Dr. Harbison confirmed he found a small abrasion and flap of skin facing downwards 1.5 inches away from Father Niall's scrotum. Based on Dr. Harbison's answer in relation to the downward direction of the injury, Mr. Charlton suggested that it was likely caused by a kick while Father Niall was lying on the floor. Dr. Harbison agreed it was consistent with a kick, but also tried to play it down by stating, "I think it's reading too much into a very small abrasion on the leg. There was no tear on the trousers. It was an insignificant injury." In relation to the claims of a lot of drink being taken and tiredness leading to death by misadventure, Dr. Harbison was firm. He stated that Father Molloy's blood alcohol limit was within the limits of ordinary social drinking and would not have constituted inebriation. Dr. Harbison confirmed he found neither offensive nor defensive wounds or marks on Father Niall's hands or arms. It appeared to him that Father Niall did not ward off any blows and did not strike any either. He reiterated that Father Niall received 5, 6, or more blows. Mr. Charlton then pressed Dr. Harbison in relation to his recollections of the watch. Dr. Harbison stated that he had no recollection of saying, "That watch is going," while removing it from Father Niall's wrist at the post-mortem. Nor did he have any memory of the watch being broken. He stated, "I'd normally note something like that." Mr. Charlton then asked if Dr. Harbison had any recollection of a conversation between him and Detective Michael Keating at Father Niall's post-mortem about the resilience of the watches of victims of the Air India bombing. On the 23rd of June 1985, an Air India passenger airliner carrying 329 people exploded in a bomb attack 120 miles off the southern coast of Ireland. There were no survivors. Detective Garda Michael Keating attended some of the post-mortems on the victims of the disaster carried out by Dr. Harbison. Dr. Harbison explained that many victims of the bombing had been wearing the same brand of watch. He had been impressed by the brand of watch which remained in working order even after a bombing and a subsequent fall from the sky of over 20,000 feet. He said the air disaster may have been mentioned at Father Niall's post-mortem, but he did not recall the conversation. Dr. Harbison's evidence concluded with an estimation of the time of Father Niall's death being sometime between late on the night of the 7th of July and into the early hours of the 8th of July, 1985. The witness was then excused. Dr. Declan Gilsenan, the pathologist appointed by the Flynns, was the next witness to be called. The coroner, Mr. Mahan, suggested that once Dr. Gilsenan had finished giving evidence, it would be helpful to recall Dr. Harbison. He wanted Dr. Harbison to say if he disagreed with Dr. Gilsenan's evidence, and if so, why. Mr. Mahan addressed the jury on important points to bear in mind about Dr. Gilsenan's evidence. He explained that Dr. Gilsenan had not been to the murder scene or observed the body where it lay. Neither had he been at the post-mortem. Dr. Gilsenan's evidence was based on his examination of the pathological slides, the post-mortem report, and discussions with Dr. Harbison. Dr. Gilsenan opened by stating that he agreed with Dr. Harbison's opinion, that the cause of death was due to pulmonary oedema or a buildup of fluid in the lungs. He then offered 3 possible causes for the pulmonary oedema in Father Niall's case. The first possibility agreed with Dr. Harbison's opinion that Father Niall's lungs filled up with fluid due to the head injuries he had sustained. The second possibility was the oedema could have been caused due to the inhalation of vomit. Dr. Gilsenan explained he found a spot on the lung when examining a pathology slide. He felt this was potential proof Father Niall had inhaled his own vomit or some stomach contents. And finally, Dr. Gilsenan stated that the pulmonary oedema could have been caused by heart failure. He suggested that the exertion of an altercation between Richard and Father Niall could have caused a cardiac arrhythmia, leading to the oedema in the lungs. He proposed that cardiac failure could have been due to the deceased's emotional state, coupled with exercise, and may not necessarily have been connected to the head injuries. Dr. Gilsenan finished his evidence by saying he could not see how Dr. Harbison could narrow down his choice to just one out of the three possible causes of pulmonary oedema. The witness was then excused. Dr. Harbison was recalled to the stand. He respectfully disagreed with his learned colleague and outlined why. First, he addressed the possibility of the pulmonary oedema being caused due to the inhalation of vomit. Dr. Harbison stated that there was no evidence of vomit in the airways and no food matter in the stomach. He also reminded the court that Teresa Flynn had attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on Father Niall that night. Therefore, any substance found could have been from Teresa blowing into his lungs. Next, Mr. Charlton asked if it was possible Father Niall had or could have had a heart attack. Dr. Harbison replied that he didn't like to use the term heart attack, it was too vague. He confirmed Father Niall did not have proof of what people conceive to be a heart attack. There was no evidence of coronary thrombosis, a coronary infarct, or a myocardial infarct. He stated that Father Niall did not and could not have died from heart failure. He further stated that Father Molloy's heart was working away and pumping away before he died. The gist of my evidence is that he did not have a heart attack. The bleeding and clotting on the brain was proof Father Niall's heart was definitely still pumping blood around his body after he was beaten. Dr. Harbison was then asked about the effects of stress on Father Niall's heart because of the condition it was in. He felt that Father Niall's heart was barely enlarged for a man of his size and age. He went on to state that a man who could lift 2 poles, such as were used in horse jumping, and carry them around, and who could muck out his stables weekly, would have a reasonable tolerance of exercise. The question of the condition of Father Niall's heart and it being a contributory factor in his death was put to Dr. Harbison. He stressed firmly that none of the pathological evidence detracts from the head injuries as the cause of death. I'd like to emphasize that I speak not only my own opinion, but I examined his brain with a neuropathologist at the Richmond Hospital. I cannot ignore the findings and I cannot ignore the opinions of a colleague. This would conclude his evidence. Dr. Maureen Smith of the State Forensic Science Laboratory would be the final witness to testify on the first day of the inquest. Dr. Smith began by listing items of physical evidence the Gardaí had provided to her. She testified to also being provided with samples of blood from Richard, Teresa, and Father Niall. Dr. Smith briefly explained to the court the process of grouping blood types. She explained that in this case, the 3 people involved all had different blood groups so she could distinguish between them. This enabled her to report that most of the blood found around the bedroom belonged to Father Niall. Dr. Smith went on to explain that stains of blood found on the bedspread belonged to both Richard and Father Niall. Richard's blood was identified on his own pajama bottoms. His blood was also found on the back of Father Niall's trousers, just above the back pocket. Teresa's blood was found on the back of Richard's pajama top, however scant descriptions of the injuries Teresa sustained did not mention she had any open wounds. Dr. Smith further testified that the bloodstains on a yellow towel found in the bathroom next to Father Niall's room belonged to either Richard or Teresa. It was not Father Niall's blood. A swab taken from the bloodstain on the newel post at the top of the stairs could not be grouped. Dr. Smith admitted that not all the bloodstains were able to be grouped, but she provided no explanation as to why. Nor did Dr. Smith provide any information as to the analysis the lab had undertaken on pieces of physical evidence taken from the scene, or indeed any results they may have found. Once Dr. Smith completed her testimony just after 4 p.m., the inquest was adjourned for the day. The second day of the inquest, Friday, the 25th of July 1986, was filled with anticipation. The proceedings the day before focused mainly on technical, medical and forensic evidence, but today eyewitnesses would be called. Everyone wondered, could this be the day Richard and Teresa Flynn would take the stand and finally explain what had happened? Garda Fox from Clara Garda Station was the first witness on day 2. He would read aloud from his original statement made a year before. He testified to preserving the scene at Kilcoursey House on the 8th of July 1985 and accompanying Father Niall's body when it was removed to the morgue. Garda Fox then confirmed that he attended the post-mortem, and when it was over he was handed Father Niall's belongings by Detective Garda Keating. After the Today Tonight programme, Garda Fox was also asked to prepare an additional statement in relation to the watch, but he was not given his additional statement to read. Under cross-examination by Mr. Charlton, he stated that he noticed that the glass of the watch was broken, but he didn't remember seeing if it had stopped or what time it told. The witness was then excused. Detective Garda Michael Keating from the ballistics section of the Garda Technical Bureau was the next witness to take the stand. He described the scene on his arrival in Kilcoursey on Monday the 8th of July 1985. He testified to bagging the evidence at the scene and handling Father Niall's personal effects at the post-mortem. The following day, Tuesday the 9th of July, Detective Garda Keating and his colleagues returned to Kilcoursey and he conducted a detailed examination of the bloodstains at the scene. He described some of the blood splatters as diluted, with the appearance of travelling in a downwards direction. Following on from his original statement, Detective Garda Keating was then given his additional statement to read. His additional statement was dated the 6th of July, 1986, 3 days after Today Tonight was aired. In it, he described receiving a gold wristwatch from Dr. Harbison at the post-mortem. Dr. Harbison removed the watch from the left wrist of the deceased, and Detective Garda Keating stated that the watch was in good working order. The detective remembered the brand of Father Niall's watch was the same one a victim of the Air India bombing was wearing. The bombing victim's watch was still working too, and he remembered making remarks about this to Dr. Harbison. Under cross-examination, Detective Garda Keating eventually conceded there may have been a superficial scratch on the glass of the watch, but he was adamant it was not sufficient to cause it to cease functioning. Mr. Charlton then asked Detective Garda Keating about the patterns of the blood splatters he found at the scene. The detective explained that while going up the stairs to examine the scene, he observed what he thought to be blood at the top of the banister and on a white newel post. He also recalled seeing blood on the outside of the master bedroom door. Neither the blood on the newel post or on the door were ever identified. Detective Garda Keating then went on to describe a pattern of blood splatter known as a sunburst pattern. A sunburst pattern is caused when blood spreads out in all directions away from the central point of impact. He explained if someone struck their head hard enough off a hard surface, causing an open wound, it is expected that you would find a distinctive sunburst pattern. Detective Garda Keating told the court, "I found no such pattern in the room in Kilcoursey House." The carpet fibres embedded in the front of Father Niall's jumper and trousers suggested to Detective Garda Keating that Father Niall had been dragged across the carpet and then turned over onto his back. He confirmed that Gardaí found the body lying on its back. Mr. Charlton then put it to Detective Garda Keating that Father Niall could have been moved a third time. He suggested that if, after being dragged across the carpet and then flipped over, Father Niall could also have been moved closer to the door. Detective Garda Keating answered, "That's a distinct possibility." The detective also agreed to the possibility of an attempt being made to clean Father Niall's face before the Gardaí arrived. The Flynn's counsel, Mr. Connolly, was next to cross-examine the witness. He asked Detective Garda Keating about the blood found on the footboard. The detective clarified that the bloodstain on the footboard was a smear, not a sunburst pattern. He was of the opinion it had been made by someone's bloody hand, laying on it, then smearing across it. Detective Garda Keating also suggested that the downward-facing diluted bloodstains could have been caused by someone shaking wet and bleeding hands. He was then asked whether there was any evidence that there was water thrown on Father Niall. He testified to finding no evidence of water, but it was possible it could have evaporated from the carpet by the time he arrived. This would conclude his evidence. Next, Sergeant Kevin Ford from Clara Garda Station read out his original statement from 1985 under oath. He confirmed Father Duignan alerted him to the death of a priest in the Flynn's home in the early hours of the morning of the 8th of July, 1985. He went on to testify that he got the impression from Father Duignan it was an accident and the priest had fallen against a wall and had hit his head. He repeated Father Duignan's statement about a terrible scandal in the parish and his asking if there was any way it could be kept quiet. The remainder of his testimony was the same as he provided at the trial. Sergeant Ford was the other local Garda who prepared an additional statement about the watch at the request of the Deputy Garda Commissioner, but he was not given his additional statement to read either. However, under cross-examination, he stated that on handing back the watch to William Molloy, "I noticed that the glass on the face of it was broken, but still in place. I did not notice if the watch had stopped or what time was on it." The witness was then excused. Detective Noel Lina would take the stand to testify to observing injuries to Richard's hands and Richard's admission of having struck Father Niall under the chin. He was of the opinion that Richard was of a distressed state of mind at the time. He also explained he took Richard's nightclothes into evidence. Next, Detective Sergeant John Dunn was called to give evidence. He read the notes of his conversation with Teresa in hospital 2 days after Father Niall's death. He described finding her to be composed and lucid, and she willingly spoke to him while he took notes. This would conclude his evidence. Next, Inspector Thomas Monaghan would take the stand and would describe what he saw on his arrival at Kilcoursey. He testified to taking notes while interviewing Richard and Richard's refusal to sign the notes thereafter. The coroner, Mr. Mahan, believed that any motive for Father Niall's death was speculative and lacked evidence. He would not allow the Gardaí's suggested motive for Father Niall's death, being due to the money Richard owed him, to be entered as evidence. As a coroner's inquest has limited powers, Mr. Mahan concluded that a motive was not relevant to where, when, or how Father Niall died. He felt it would be up to either the criminal or civil courts to ascertain a motive. The next witness called to give evidence was Dr. Dan O'Sullivan, the Flynn's GP. As with all the witnesses, Dr. O'Sullivan read out his original statement. Under cross-examination by Mr. Charlton, Dr. O'Sullivan strongly denied the suggestion he had Teresa admitted before 2 a.m. However, he couldn't remember the exact time. Dr. O'Sullivan suggested, "It was sometime up to 3 a.m. I should think it was between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. In relation to who first alerted him, Dr. O'Sullivan was asked by Mr. Charlton, "Was David Flynn at the door?" He answered no. Mr. Charlton pressed the matter. "Didn't you tell Ian Maher that David Flynn was the first one who woke you up?" Dr. O'Sullivan denied saying this. He stated that when he answered the door, Father Duignan was there with one of the Flynn's daughters. Dr. O'Sullivan then went on to recall that when he arrived at Kilcoursey House, there was a sense of panic among the other family members, but Richard was very calm. He recalled speaking with Richard alone and alleged Richard indicated that a row had broken out downstairs between himself and Father Niall. He stated, "I got the impression they had an argument downstairs first, and he didn't tell me what the argument was about." Dr. O'Sullivan then presumed Father Niall had followed Richard upstairs to the bedroom, where the argument continued. When he was asked if he had any doubt that Richard had told him the row began downstairs, he replied, "I have very little doubt." According to Dr. O'Sullivan, Richard claimed to have struck Father Niall, whereby he fell. When Father Niall got up, Richard said he hit him again with his fist, and this time he stayed down. When asked about treating Richard's injuries, Dr. O'Sullivan said that later that day, Monday the 8th of July, he tended to an injury Richard sustained to his finger. He also noticed bruising on Richard's arm. When asked about his estimation of how long Father Niall had been dead, Dr. O'Sullivan testified that the body was still fairly warm when he got there. He felt Father Niall was not long dead. He estimated around an hour, but wouldn't go as far as 2. Mr. Charlton then put the following question to Dr. O'Sullivan. "And you saw a fair amount of signs of blood around the bedroom?" Dr. O'Sullivan stated, "I didn't notice any blood around the bedroom." Mr. Charlton asked again in a tone of doubt and disbelief, "You didn't notice any blood around the bedroom?" Dr. O'Sullivan answered, "No." The doctor explained that once he ascertained Father Niall was dead, he switched his attention to Teresa. He described her as being hysterical, and she refused to believe Father Niall was dead. He recalled she became violent, and it took 2 or 3 people to restrain her before he sedated her. Teresa had what Dr. O'Sullivan described as a good-sized bruise on her left cheek. He was worried she may have been concussed, so he took the decision to drive her to Tullamore Hospital. Dr. O'Sullivan told the court that during the drive to the hospital, Teresa was completely delusional and believed she had had an accident with a horse. He testified that before he left for Tullamore, he suggested to Father Duignan that he should alert the Gardaí. Dr. O'Sullivan was next cross-examined by counsel for the state, Mr. McKenna. Mr. McKenna asked what his impression was when he was first alerted to Father Niall's death. Dr. O'Sullivan stated that when he was told Father Niall was dead and asked to come to Kilcoursey House, there was no mention of violence. He assumed Father Niall had died from natural causes, that was, until he arrived and saw Father Niall's face. Mr. McKenna then asked Dr. O'Sullivan if anyone had said that Father Niall had sustained his injuries by falling against a wall. Dr. O'Sullivan answered no. The witness was then excused. Mr. Charlton next requested Dr. Peter Greeley from Tullamore Hospital be called to give evidence about Teresa Flynn's admission. This request was based on what Dr. Greeley previously had told Ian and Ben, that Teresa had been admitted to hospital between midnight and 2 a.m., contrary to the official statements. The coroner determined that Teresa's admission and medical condition at the time were not relevant to how, when, and where Father Niall died. Instead of giving evidence, Dr. Greeley was asked to read his deposition aloud. He would state that after telling Ian and Ben the admission took place between midnight and 2 a.m., he had revisited his notes. He would then reaffirm that Teresa had been admitted to Tullamore Hospital between 3:15 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. on the 8th of July 1985. The next witness to be sworn in that morning was Father James Dignan, the parish priest from Clara. Father Dignan was the only independent witness who turned up to the inquest with legal representation. The church had enlisted Mr. Thomas Menton, a Dublin solicitor, to help Father Dignan prepare to give evidence at the inquest. Father Dignan began by reading aloud his original statement taken by the Gardaí in 1985. It was the same evidence he had given at Richard's trial. Under cross-examination, he stated he couldn't say whether Father Niall was dead or alive when he anointed him, but he did notice bloodstains in the bedroom. Father Dignan told the court that on arrival at Kilcoursey House, he saw only Richard, Teresa, and the deceased in the house. Mr. Charlton pressed Father Dignan as to why he had not called 999. Remarkably, Father Dignan told the court that he did not know 999 was the number for the emergency services. As a result, he was not aware that had he called 999, he could have summoned medical assistance. Father Dignan also claimed he didn't know the local doctor's number, nor did it occur to him to call to Dr. Corby's house. Father Dignan stated he was made aware that Dr. Corby was actually away after speaking with the Flynn daughters in the kitchen later that morning. During their initial investigation, the Gardaí did not pursue this avenue of inquiry to ascertain its veracity either. Father Dignan told the court that when he entered the master bedroom, he saw Teresa kneeling beside the body, but he did not talk to her or ask her any questions. He went on to say that he spent around 2 hours in Kilcoursey House that morning, and he spent most of that time in the kitchen. One new piece of information was then revealed by Father Dignan when he was asked about his movements in Kilcoursey House that morning. Father Dignan told the court that before he went to alert the Gardaí, he and Richard had a private conversation in the sitting room lasting about 10 minutes. When Father Dignan was asked to elaborate on what was said between he and Richard, he replied, "I can't assist the inquest any further on that conversation because of my profession." Father Dignan had just claimed what's called sacerdotal privilege. It's the same privilege afforded to someone making a confession to a priest. There was legal precedence for this privilege, so Father Dignan was not forced to elaborate anymore. Next, he was asked about what he had said to Sergeant Ford when he called to his house that night. Apparently, Father Dignan had no recollection of what he'd said to Sergeant Ford apart from the fact that a priest was dead in the Flynn household. Nor did he have any recollection of saying anything about a scandal in the parish. This would conclude his evidence. Aunt May was not on the list of witnesses to give evidence, therefore she would not be cross-examined. Instead, she would read her deposition aloud for the court. Her deposition was the prepared statement, signed in the presence of the family solicitor, Liam Lycett, the year before. In it, she would state, "There was no one else in the house. We were in the drawing room. They were talking while I played patience. Teresa and Richard were tired and had said that they were going to bed. Aunt May described getting a drink from the kitchen as she normally did before going to bed. As she was leaving the kitchen, she met Father Niall on his way in to get a drink at about midnight. Just after midnight, she went to bed in a bedroom at the end of the hall. Auntie May stated she closed the door and heard nothing else at all that night. Her grandnephew, David, told her the next morning that Father Niall was dead. When she finished reading, Auntie May signed her deposition, witnessed by the coroner. The signature on her statement from a year before, which was witnessed by Mr. Lycett, and the signature she had just made in front of the coroner do not resemble each other. Teresa Flynn would be called as the next witness. She steadied her voice as she read her statement aloud, describing Maureen and Ralph's wedding on Saturday the 6th of July 1985. She stated that the cold buffet lunch on the Sunday ended at around 5 p.m. A little later, she, Richard and Father Niall would visit the Goodbodies. While visiting, they each had a small amount of drink. Teresa claimed that they got back to Kilcoursey House at around 9:30 p.m. She then went on to describe what had happened after they got home from the Goodbodies. She said that she, Richard and Father Niall were having a couple of drinks in the sitting room, but after a while Teresa felt very tired and announced she was going to bed. She then stated,
"It was suggested that we each have a nightcap and Richard was to get these and bring them up to our bedroom."
Teresa went on to describe how she had gone upstairs, took a sleeping pill, got into bed and then dozed off. She woke up a while later to find her husband in his pajamas sitting next to her in bed chatting with Father Niall, who was still dressed and sitting at the end of the bed. She claimed she could not remember what happened after seeing Richard and Father Niall sitting and chatting on the bed. She had no memory of any row. She then stated,
"I don't remember what happened. My next memory was of waking up and regaining consciousness on the floor."
Teresa then told the court she was dazed. She saw Father Niall also lying on the floor. She did not see any blood or any signs of violence, so she thought that Father Niall had just passed out. Teresa did admit she noticed blood on his lip, but thought it was just a cold sore. She recalled telling Father Niall he should go to bed. Only Teresa and Father Niall were in the room at this point, so she went out onto the landing at the top of the stairs and called out Richard's name. There was no reply, so she assumed she was on her own in the house. When she came back into the room, she lifted Father Niall's shoulders to try to revive him, but he didn't respond. When she checked, she couldn't hear a heartbeat. She stated that all she could hear was an awful gurgling sound. Teresa claimed that she had suffered both a lapse of memory and hysteria, telling the court,
"My brain was very upset and addled."
Her next memories were of being given a sedative and then being brought to Tullamore Hospital. She described her injuries as bruising to her left arm and an injury to her jaw. When cross-examined by Mr. Charlton, Teresa said she didn't think her husband had been drinking a great deal in the days leading up to the wedding, as he had been busy organising the event. Mr. Charlton asked her to explain the damage to the two tables. Teresa told the court that the damage to the foot of the dining table was caused by someone half leaning, half sitting on it on the day of the wedding. She then explained that the coffee table in the TV room had been damaged on Sunday, the day after the wedding. Teresa claimed that her two nephews broke the coffee table while watching the Wimbledon final. Then they came to her apologising for breaking the table. Mr. Charlton then moved on to ask Teresa why she didn't call 999. She explained that after the incident, it hadn't entered her mind that it was anything that serious. When cross-examined by counsel for the state, Mr. McKenna, Teresa recalled that while visiting the Goodbodies, they struck up a conversation about holidays. Teresa, Richard and Father Niall continued the conversation when they got back to Kilcoursey House. According to Teresa, it was just an ordinary conversation. Her counsel, Mr. Connolly, asked how Father Niall was leading up to that night. She remembered that Father Niall had been suffering from hay fever all that weekend. Teresa told the court that a year before, Father Niall had been kicked in the head by a horse and he had to have stitches. Unfortunately, due to her lapse of memory, Teresa's evidence didn't help to clarify any further what happened the night Father Niall died. She was then excused. Richard Flynn would be the last witness called to give evidence. He read aloud the version of events Detective Inspector Monaghan took down in writing from him in Kilcoursey House the year before. Richard explained how Father Niall had been a very close friend of the family for 28 years. On the night in question, Richard stated that he and Teresa had gone to bed just after midnight and Father Niall followed them up to the bedroom. According to Richard, quite an amount of drink had been taken. He recalled getting up out of bed to go downstairs to get another drink. Then a stupid argument began because he refused to get his wife or Father Niall a drink too. Richard described how he was viciously attacked by his wife and Father Niall at the same time, stating, "My wife jumped out of bed and Father Molloy got up from where he was sitting and they both charged me." Richard went on to describe how he knocked his wife unconscious with a punch to the left side of her face with a clenched fist. He remembered punching Father Niall twice, also with a clenched fist. When Richard went over to check on them, his wife was breathing, but Father Niall was breathing with difficulty. He went into the ensuite to get water, which he threw on both of them to revive them. Teresa came around, but Father Niall didn't. He stated he knew Father Niall had a heart condition and was still having difficulty breathing, so Richard said an act of contrition into his ear. After that, he ran downstairs to contact Father Dignan and managed to get in touch with him, but he couldn't contact Dr. O'Sullivan by phone. Richard then went back upstairs. When he went back into the bedroom, Teresa was on the floor in hysterics. She told Richard that Father Niall was dead. Mr. Charlton then cross-examined the witness. Under questioning, Richard denied moving Father Niall's body across the bedroom floor. He would also deny cleaning Father Niall's face because he hadn't noticed it was covered in blood. Mr. Charlton then continued, "Mr. Flynn, did you clean the wounds on Father Molloy's face?" "No." "When you went in to whisper an act of contrition in his ear, did you notice his face?" "No." "Mr. Flynn, can I ask you how it is you came not to notice his face at that time?" "Because his head was turned over on his right side and I whispered an act of contrition into his left ear." "Why didn't you turn him over?" "Because his left ear was nearest to me and I whispered an act of contrition into his left ear." Richard didn't say an act of contrition into his wife's ear because he said she came too. He also claimed that it didn't occur to him to dial 999 when he couldn't contact Dr. O'Sullivan. Richard claimed he didn't know that Dr. Corby was in the village and lived closer than Dr. O'Sullivan. Mr. Charlton then asked what led up to the row. Richard stated it started because he refused to get drinks. When he was asked did he tell William Molloy the row was about politics, he denied it, stating, "We did not discuss politics." Richard denied telling Father Dignan that Father Niall had hit his head against a wall. He would also deny telling Dr. O'Sullivan that the row started downstairs earlier in the evening. Richard would allege he hit Father Niall twice, maybe 3 times, but in the heat of the moment, he couldn't be sure. Mr. Charlton then asked if he swung or aimed any punches. Richard replied, "I was protecting myself. I was attacked by Father Molloy viciously." He stated he put his hand up to ward off a blow to the face from Father Niall and received an injury called mallet finger. Mallet finger is the term used to describe when the tip of the finger cannot be straightened due to a stretched or torn tendon. He would also claim to have marks on his arm from receiving a punch and a squeeze that Dr. O'Sullivan treated him for the next day. Under questioning, Richard denied telling Dr. O'Sullivan he hit Father Niall, who then fell, and when he got up, he hit him again. Richard claimed Father Niall was still upright when he hit him with the second punch. Mr. Charlton put it to Richard that according to Dr. Harbison, Father Niall's injuries were consistent with being hit 5, 6 or more times. Richard disagreed with Dr. Harbison's evidence. Mr. Charlton then asked Richard to explain the discrepancy between the 3 punches he admitted to and at least 6 injuries to Father Niall's face. Richard suggested that Father Niall could have fallen and struck his head against the bedpost or the TV stand or other objects. Mr. Charlton reminded Richard that there was no evidence of sunburst blood patterns to substantiate these claims. When Mr. Charlton then asked what happened after Richard struck the second punch, he claimed, "I had a lapse of memory." He would further claim, "After I saw the 2 people lying on the floor, I got my memory back." Mr. Charlton put it to Richard, "I suggest to you that that is not the truth." Richard replied, "That is the truth." Mr. Charlton suggested that Richard's lapse of memory was convenient and it suited him. Richard strenuously denied this, stating that he had been seeing a psychiatrist in a bid to restore his memory of that night's events. Mr. McKenna for the state was the next to cross-examine. When he was asked why between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. the Gardaí were not alerted, Richard stated that he asked Father Dignan to take care of that. Mr. McKenna then asked Richard what he thought was the motivation for Teresa and Father Niall to suddenly and simultaneously attack him. Richard said that he couldn't understand why he had been attacked, but that he had to protect himself. He recalled going up to bed with a nightcap for Teresa and a drink for himself. Father Niall was invited up to join them to finish his drink. They were close friends for 28 years, and this was quite common. Richard claimed that in all that time they never had a row. They were just chatting about maybe going to Normandy on holidays that year. He said that Teresa then handed him her glass and asked him to get her and Father Niall more drinks. Richard told Teresa that Father Niall already had a drink, and he handed her glass back to her. He told them they could go and get their own drinks. He claimed that Teresa then became abusive. As the row broke out, Teresa got up out of bed and Father Niall also rose, and they both charged at him. Richard said, "I was very surprised." Mr. McKenna then asked Richard if it had occurred to him to ask them both to take things more easily or to even to have gone and fetched the drinks. The court erupted in laughter at this suggestion. When the laughter died down, Richard replied, "There wasn't time for that." Mr. Connolly, counsel representing Richard, was next to question him. Richard denied either kicking Father Niall or using an implement to hit him. Mr. Connolly asked Richard about the footwear he was wearing at the time. Richard replied that he had not been wearing either shoes or slippers. Richard stated that his predominant concern was for Teresa once he discovered Father Niall was dead. He put the whole incident down to the overtiredness of his wife and her having taken a sleeping tablet. Once the cross-examinations were completed, the coroner turned to Richard Flynn. Mr. Mann asked Richard if he wanted to add anything to his statement. Richard would decline. Lastly, Mr. Mahan asked Richard if there was anything simmering under the surface likely to have triggered the explosive row. Richard answered no. He was excused, and the inquest was adjourned for the day. Unusually, instead of reconvening the following Monday, the coroner suggested out of convenience for anyone who had travelled for the inquest to conclude proceedings the next day, Saturday the 26th of July. Richard and Teresa Flynn did not attend for the last day of the inquest. Proceedings began at 10 a.m, with each counsel being given the opportunity to sum up their final arguments to the jury. Then the jury would be asked to retire to deliberate on a verdict. The coroner, Mr. Mahon, began his summation by stating, "There were a number of inconsistent threads running throughout the evidence, but unfortunately, there were also a number of mysteries about the case. Some have been resolved by this inquest, some certainly have not." Mr. Mahon then referred to the bloody drag mark across the carpet as one of the mysteries. He said, "Some person moved the body and moved him in a dragging fashion. The mark was too definite and can only be explained by someone being dragged along the carpet." Another example of an unsolved mystery Mr. Mahon provided was the injury Father Niall received near his groin. Mr. Mahon could not understand how Father Niall received this injury. He noted Father Niall had a heart irregularity, but not of a very severe nature. As for suffering a heart attack, Mr. Mahon stated that due to the medical evidence, a cardiac arrest could only have been a contributing factor and not the primary cause of death. He accepted the evidence Dr. Harbison gave and stated, "To go on from that premise that Father Molloy died of cardiac arrest due to getting emotionally involved is taking a giant leap." He told the jury that Father Niall would be walking around alive and well today if he had not received those fatal blows to the head. In relation to the constant suggestions that all involved were intoxicated, Mr. Mahon stated, "I don't believe any of them was drunk, even in the social sense." He accepted the Garda evidence in relation to the watch working and stated that he would have been reluctant to have placed much reliance on the stopped watch theory anyway. Mr. Mahon was satisfied that, as Aunt May's deposition stated, she was the last to see Father Niall at midnight. Father Niall couldn't have died before midnight. He was also satisfied that the time of death was at 1 a.m, because that was when Richard phoned Father Dignan. He went on to explain that he could understand why, in a small town in rural Ireland, a priest was called first. He also understood why Father Dignan would make the statement to Sergeant Ford about a scandal in the parish. Mr. Mahon even stated that he could understand the Flynns waiting for family members to arrive home before taking the decision to contact the Gardaí. However, while he said he could appreciate the panic that would have ensued in Kilcoursey House that night, Mr. Mahon couldn't understand what could have triggered such intense and furious anger. He went on to say, "I can only believe that something gave rise to that eruption of anger by one, two, or all of those persons, and this inquiry has not been told what it was." Mr. Mahon felt that the duty of the inquest to ascertain the how, when, and where Father Niall died had been fulfilled. Peter Charlton, on behalf of the Molloy family, in summation, said that if the jury decided Father Niall died from heart failure, they would be flying in the face of common sense. He felt the jury should dismiss suggestions that Father Niall fell and hit his head in the bedroom, as the evidence simply did not support this. Mr. Charlton also suggested that Richard's memory lapses were coincidental, and he was using them to support his story of only striking 2 blows to Father Niall. He said that common sense suggested that during the period of memory lapse, events had taken place which would shame any person. However, he asked the jury not to condemn anyone. Mr. Connolly, counsel for the Flynns, summed up by asking the jury to consider the evidence given by Dr. Gilsenan as an alternative to Dr. Harbison's opinion as to the cause of death. He suggested that due to Father Niall's heart condition, he may have been more frail than most people. Mr. Connolly then pointed out to the jury that the case had carried unusual public interest, and he hoped that the cruel rumours and speculation would now be put aside. He felt that the inquest should now clear the air. Mr. Connolly wished to express publicly, and for the first time possible, the anguish, sympathy, and understanding of the Flynn family at the death of their long-time family friend in their home. Mr. McKenna, for the state, would not address the jury. Mr. Mann then asked the jury to retire, to deliberate, and to reach a verdict. The jury retired at 11:55 a.m. After just 13 minutes of deliberation, word came back that the jury had reached a verdict, and everyone filed back into the court. A local Fine Gael urban councillor, Mr. Billy Bracken, had been chosen as the jury foreman. Mr. Bracken read the verdict aloud for the court. It is the unanimous verdict of the jury that Father Niall Molloy died as a result of acute brain hemorrhage, consistent with having suffered a serious injury to the head. With this, applause and cheering broke out in the public gallery. When the commotion died down, William Molloy made his way over to the jury and shook hands with each one individually, thanking them for doing their duty. Peter Charlton had achieved the goal he and Ben O'Rafferty had set for the inquest. The verdict now reflected Dr. Harbison's medical evidence. Father Niall had died from head injuries. There would be no legal consequences for anyone as a result of the verdict, but the Molloy family and their counsel wanted to turn public opinion on how Father Niall died. They felt the ambiguity of a heart attack being the primary cause of death, and the premise of Father Niall being the instigator of the attack, as suggested during the trial, needed to be set straight. The inquest had revealed that there was no pathological proof of a heart attack. There was no evidence that Father Niall had attacked Richard first, so self-defense was disproved. Heart disease, being a contributory factor to Father Niall's death, had been strenuously dismissed by Dr. Harbison during his testimony. The analysis of the blood spatter evidence did not support the pinball theory offered this time by Richard Flynn on the stand. And finally, the people involved were not considered by Dr. Harbison or the coroner to have been intoxicated, thus dispelling the misadventure argument. Mr. Charlton, in his cross-examination of the inquest witnesses, had totally refuted all four arguments that led to Richard being acquitted in Dublin. Jean Kerrigan, in his book Hard Cases, described what the foreman of the jury was heard to say when he was leaving the courthouse. A member of the public shouted congratulations across the car park at Billy Bracken while he was walking back to his car. Billy turned and replied, "It had to be done." David Flynn attended the last day of the inquest in lieu of his parents. He was surrounded by the media when he left the court. A journalist for the Sunday Tribune managed to encourage David to say a few words. David began by expressing his sympathy on behalf of his family to Father Niall's relatives and friends. He then said, "We've been through a very difficult year, and it was made more difficult because we knew things and couldn't explain before now. It was a difficult decision for us to attend this inquest, but we decided to do so because we were prepared to be cross-examined in public. It was difficult going through two court cases." When he was asked if the family had rallied around each other, David replied, "We are very close." Tom McCaughrean with RTE News then put a question to him on camera. He asked David Flynn if his family had found it very difficult to handle the rumours and speculations surrounding the case. David Flynn replied, "Extremely difficult. It's difficult maybe when one knows certain answers and isn't in a position to comment. It makes it very difficult to live with." A press conference was held by the Molloy family in the Phoenix Arms Hotel in Tullamore after the verdict was announced. The Molloy family felt their stance had been vindicated by the verdict of the inquest. Ian Maher would speak on behalf of the Molloy family and said, "The family had come to the inquest to see a verdict that Father Niall Molloy had died as a result of acute brain injuries, and they had got that verdict." While they were satisfied with the verdict, there were a number of questions to be answered in relation to several pieces of evidence which had emerged during the inquest. The Molloys felt Dr. Harbison's opinion of 5 or 6 or more punches had not been reconciled. They also felt that the inquest had now highlighted the farce of the criminal trial. Ian stated, "This is the first time that this case has been judged by plain, ordinary people, that is, the jury." Solicitor for the Molloys, Ben O'Rafferty, explained to the media in the room that under the Civil Liabilities Act, if a person is killed, their family is entitled to bring a case for damages and compensation. He told them, "Whatever we do after this, we are most definitely going to take a civil action." Following the devastating outcome of the trial, the Molloy family finally secured the rightful verdict on the cause of Father Niall's death. However, their fight was far from over. They remained steadfast in their mission to hold someone to account. In episode 5, staying true to their word, the Molloy family initiate civil proceedings against the Flynns. Things go from bad to worse for Richard Flynn when the taxman comes calling. And his hopes of auctioning Kilcoursey House quickly to ease his financial pressures are dashed. This series was written, produced and edited by Liv Kerwin. Narrated by Marcus Kerwin. Music, Take Up Your Cross by Onchenko Music. We would like to extend our very special thanks to Mr. Bilmar and Father Niall's family. This series is dedicated to the memory of Joe, Matthew and Tony. This has been a Kurska production.